Hey guys, it is week 4. Can you believe it? So we began our journey by asking how God would introduce himself. And he introduces himself as good creator. And what we discovered is that he created you and me. And he did so by creating us in his image. Which means that when he created you and me, and everybody for that matter, that he created us to be in relationship with himself. And so God created us to be in relationship with him. And then we ask the question, well, if God created us to be in relationship with himself, what's that look like? How does he develop relationship with us? And what we discovered was that our God develops relationship with us by making covenant with us, which means that our God makes promises that he is willing to die in order to keep. And then we ask the question, well, if God created us for relationship and he has committed himself to that relationship, that he's made promises about that relationship, what are the dynamics of that relationship? And so last week, what we investigated last week was how God called Moses to go and bring the people out. And we used this word redemption, which means that God was buying us back. They were in slavery and that God delivered them. And one of the things that we said last week, that God delivers us in order to draw us to himself. And so the dynamics of redemption, the dynamics of the relationship, is that God frees us from anything that gets in the way of a relationship in order to draw us back to himself. That's who he is. That's what he does in redemption. And so we closed last week just by identifying in the text where it said that this will be a sign to you that you will worship on this mountain. And so this week, we are at the mountain. We're at the mountain of God. God has delivered them, and he's now drawn them back to himself, and we are at the mountain. One of the question that I want to answer this week is, what are the boundaries of relationship? I mean, boundaries are those things in our life that define acceptable behavior. Relationally, boundaries define what healthy relationships look like. And so the question we want to answer is, how do we develop a healthy relationship with God? Or how does God desire to develop a healthy relationship with us? What's that look like anyways? In Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40, Jesus sums up the entire law by saying that we're called to love God and love others. That's the essence. He said, all the law hang on these 2 commandments. And so, if we're to develop a healthy relationship, that healthy relationship will be a healthy relationship with God and a healthy relationship with other people. Love God, love others. Healthy relationships. And this is done through boundaries. I know with my own kids that we have set boundaries for them in our home and in the way in which we live in order to develop them, in order to allow them to have healthy development. Riss and I have boundaries in our marriage in order to protect and to grow a healthy relationship. You know, we put boundaries in our schedules so that we can maintain and keep healthy priorities. You see, boundaries, they help us stay healthy. That's what boundaries do. They're a way in which we stay healthy. The law is like boundaries in that regard, is that the law of God helps us stay healthy. So as we look at the law through Exodus chapter 20, which is where we're going to be this week, and when they come back to the mountain of God, this is what he's going to give them is the law. He's defining for them what healthy relationships look like. And so, just like boundaries, the law defines healthy relationships. So, let's just read through, you know them as the Ten Commandments. Let's call them the law that God gave them as he drew them back to himself on the mountain. This was a sign that he was their covenant people, that I'm going to deliver you, I'm drawing you back to myself. Here they are, they're at the mountain. Chapter 20, starting verse 1. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my command. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, this next part describes what they experienced at the base of the mountain. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die." Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning." The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Now what's being described here is their experience of God's awesomeness coming down on the mountain. It says that the smoke rose up from the mountain as God descended, and so it really was an experience of God's awesomeness as he descended onto the mountain. One of the significant aspects of this is that they heard the trumpet, and the trumpet throughout the Old Testament, when you heard that, it was a call for the people to gather. And so the people were to gather around the Lord God at the mountain. Now, there had been boundaries placed for them that they couldn't go up the mountain. Remember, this is a holy God that we are talking about. And so when Moses met the Lord at the burning bush that didn't burn up, that wasn't consumed, he said, "Take off your sandals, because the ground upon which you are standing is holy." So this is a holy God. So when he descends on the mountain, that his holiness is there. And so he tells them the boundaries. Don't come up on the mountain. It will not go well for you. But the call of the trumpet was really that they were to gather around the mountain to experience who God was. And God was revealing himself to the people at the mountain. And here we have God giving them the law. And the law was one of the ways in which God was indeed revealing himself. And so if we're going to ask the question of what's the purpose of the law, what's the purpose of the boundaries that God has set? Well, the purpose is to reveal himself. And he reveals himself as the God who has redeemed them. He begins by saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I'm your Redeemer, he says. And so he's revealing himself of now what it means to be in relationship. What are the boundaries of being in relationship with this God who redeems? And he reveals himself and his expectations, or the boundaries, saying, you shall not have, you shall have no other gods before me. Well, the assumption is that if God was saying that there were no gods to come before him, that there would be no gods to come after him either, that he was it. And that was one of the realities of the Israelite people that made them distinctive, is that the Egyptians had a whole bunch of gods, and the peoples around them had a whole bunch of gods. But the Israelites were a people of one God. We call that monotheism, that they had one God. Mono, one. Theism, God, one God. They had one God. And that made them different from all the peoples around them. And so God's revealing himself, saying, I'm it. I am God of the nations. I'm it. And from this really flows the rest of the law. If we can grasp who God is, that he's it, then the rest of them kind of fall in line with that. We read here, you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything. That makes sense. If he's it, if he's the only God, we wouldn't make something as a representation of God. Furthermore, if we were to make something that we said, this is a God, what does that make us? Well, that makes us a God because we made it. Don't take the name of the Lord in vain. Don't misuse his name. This is so much more than cursing. This is a reverence for his name, a love for his name. So to misuse it would be a statement of disrespect. Remember the Sabbath day. This was God inviting us to experience himself. This was God saying, don't put anything in the way of our relationship. 6 days work, one day set it aside for our relationship. And then there's honor your father and mother. We like this one. We think that one's important. I do as a parent, and because this is important. And it's attached with a promise, so that you may live long in the land. Then we have these shall nots. Shall not murder, shall not commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. That means don't want something that is someone else's. As you can see, if you just listen to these, that these are the boundaries for what a healthy relationship looks like. And so, man, if we want to develop healthy relationships, it would make sense that we wouldn't murder, that we wouldn't commit adultery, that we wouldn't steal, that we wouldn't lie about others, that we wouldn't covet things that are not ours. That this is the parameters for what it means to build a healthy relationship. And so the loving others aspect, that's it. Well, loving God, that God desires for him to be the only God that we're after, the only God that we serve, the only God that we desire. And so he outlines what a healthy relationship with him then looks like. I want to come to the end of the passage again as our closing. The people are afraid and they say, Moses, speak to us yourself. We don't want God to speak to us. And Moses says to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. And I think the boundaries of relationship are the test. They're the testing ground. And so I wonder this week, if you would just take some time to process and to think about what are the boundaries that you're not following or that you're operating outside of that are causing you to have unhealthy relationships. Or maybe to identify the ways in which you're staying within the boundaries and how that gives expression to healthy relationships. So as God is developing this relationship with his people, and as he's developing his relationship with you and me, is that he's defined for us what healthy relationship looks like. And he's done so through his law. And so we say this is a law that describes love. It defines love. And so Paul wrote to the Romans saying, let no debt remain outstanding except the debt to love, because it fulfills all the law and the prophets. Love is the bottom line of what the law is all about. So how are you living within the boundaries or outside of the boundaries of God's law? Think about that this week. I'm praying for you. God bless you. We'll see you next week.